Hey guys, in this video we're looking at power and conflict poetry, focusing on the poem Charge of the Light Brigade. So, the poem in a nutshell, it was written in 1854 by Tennyson after he read a newspaper report about a disastrous battle in the Crimean War. It's based on the Battle of Balaclava, where a misunderstanding of orders led 600 cavalrymen, the Light Brigade, to charge directly into a valley surrounded by Russian cannons. The main message is while the military leaders made a terrible mistake, as someone had blundered, the soldiers themselves were incredibly brave and obedient. The poem serves as a tribute to the heroism and a reminder of the glory of sacrifice. The valley of death and the mouth of hell symbolize the inescapable, terrifying nature of the trap the soldiers rode into. The key ideas are as follows. So it looks at the heroism of obedience. The poem celebrates the noble 600 for their unquestioning bravery. Despite knowing a mistake was made, the soldiers followed their duty without hesitation. Tennyson emphasizes that their power lies in their discipline, theirs but to do and die. It looks at the incompetence of leadership. So while the poem is a tribute, it contains a subtle critique of the blunder made by those in power. The contrast between the soldier's courage and the leader's mistake highlights the human cost of political or military arrogance. It looks at the brutality of modern warfare. So Tennyson uses vivid, violent imagery like the jaws of death and mouth of hell to show that war is an inescapable monster. The soldiers are stormed at by industrial weaponry, cannons showing the terrifying shift from traditional heroics to mechanized slaughter. It also looks at national glory and immortality. So, as poet laureate, Tennyson's goal was to ensure the soldier's sacrifice was not seen as a waste but as glory. The poem acts as a memorial, using a repetitive driving rhythm to ensure their rhymes, names, and their charge are permanently etched into the national memory. Let's look at the structure of the poem. So it's written in dactylic demeter, which means the rhyme sounds like dum da da, dum da da. This mimics the sound of horses' hooves galloping into battle. It creates a sense of unstoppable momentum. It's also got repetition and aphora, so lines like cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them create a feeling of being surrounded. It makes the reader feel the claustrophobia of the battlefield. It's got 6 stanzas in the poem, so each stanza represents a stage of the journey: the charge, the fight, the retreat. Some people say the 6 stanzas represent the 600 men. It's also got an irregular rhyme, so the chaotic rhyme scheme reflects the noise and the thunder of the battle, contrasting with the very strict, disciplined rhythm of the galloping horses. The context of the poem. So, it looks at the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856. This was a conflict between the Russian Empire and an alliance including Britain and France. It was the first modern war to be covered by journalists on the front lines, meaning the British public heard about the horrors of battle much faster than in previous wars. It's also looking at the Battle of Balaclava. So on October 25th, 1854, a misinterpreted order sent 600 cavalrymen, the Light Brigade, charging into a valley surrounded by Russian cannons. It was a military disaster. Over 150 men were killed in minutes. Tennyson wrote the poem after reading a newspaper account in the Times. It looks at the role of Paul Laureate. So, as the official poet for Queen Victoria, Tennyson was expected to write poems that inspired patriotism and honoured national events. He had to walk a fine line. He had to admit a blunder occurred while still making the soldiers look like heroes to keep national morale high. It also looks at Victorian notions of duty. So the Victorian era placed massive importance on the hero. Soldiers were expected to show blind obedience, the idea that a man's highest honour was to follow orders without question, even if it meant certain death. This is reflected in the famous line, theirs but to do and die. Let's look at the actual poem. So here is the full poem. You're more than welcome to pause the video, have a little read, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Let's look at doing a line-by-line analysis. So the first line is half a league, which has dactylic demeter, which means rhythm. And here the rhythm mimics the rhythmic thundering of horses' hooves. It creates a sense of immediate action and momentum. Half a league onward is an example of repetition, as here it reinforces the steady, disciplined pace of the soldiers. They do not stop or falter. All in the Valley of Death is a biblical allusion from Psalm 23, and it foreshadows their doom. By calling it the Valley of Death, Tennyson makes the battle seem epic and inevitable. Road the 600 is refrain, as it establishes the number of men as a collective unit. It highlights their unity and strength in numbers. Forward, the Light Brigade is an imperative command, and it shows a direct order given. The soldiers are passive recipients of power, as they are moved by the voices of their leaders. Charge for the guns, he said, is direct speech, as it highlights the suicidal nature of the command. The guns, which are cannons, are stationary and powerful, whilst horses are vulnerable. Into the Valley of Death is repetition, as it drives home the point that the soldiers are riding into a trap from which they cannot escape. Road to 600 is numerical imagery, as it anchors the stanza by reminding the reader of the human lives at stake. Forward, the Light Brigade is repetition as it shows the relentless nature of the military machine. Was there a man dismayed? Is a rhetorical question, as it suggests that not a single soldier showed fear, emphasizing their incredible bravery. Not though the soldier knew is a conjunction in the word not though, and it indicates that the soldiers were aware of the danger but prioritized duty over survival. Someone had blundered is diction in the word blundered, and this is the only line that blames the leaders. It acknowledges the mistake without naming exactly who is at fault, protecting the military's reputation. Theirs not to make reply is parallelism, also anaphora, and here it highlights the lack of voice or power the soldiers have. They are not allowed to question. Theirs not to reason why has rhyming triplets, as it emphasizes the theme of blind obedience, the core expectation of a Victorian soldier. Theirs but to do and die is a monosyllabic language, as it makes a statement found final and heroic. Their entire purpose is narrowed down to one fatal action. Into the valley of death is refrain, as it continues the sense of impending tragedy. Road to 600 is repetition, as it maintains a focus on the doomed collective. Canon to right of them is parallelism and anaphora, as it creates a 360-degree sense of being trapped. The reader feels claustrophobia of the battlefield. Canon to left of them has spatial imagery, as it replicates the physical layout of the ambush, which is the crossfire. Cannon in front of them has repetition, as it shows the soldiers are riding directly into the path of destruction. Volleyed and thundered has onomatopoeia, and here it recreates the terrifying noise of industrial warfare. Stormed at with shot and shell has sibilance and alliteration, and the S sounds mimic the whistling sound of bullets and shrapnel flying through the air. Boldly they rode and well, and here is an adverb in the word boldly, and it directly places their skill and courage in the face of certain death. Into the jaws of death has personification and a metaphor, and war is depicted as a hungry monster. It makes the soldier's bravery seem even more sacrificial. Into the mouth of hell has religious imagery, as it suggests that the battlefield is a place of ultimate evil and suffering beyond human comprehension. Road to 600 has refrain, as the repetition now feels more tragic as we realize how many will soon be lost. Men. Sabering the gunners there has an active verb, the word sabering, and it shows the soldiers reaching their objective. It highlights the brutal hand-to-hand nature of the combat. Charging an army, while is a juxtaposition, and it contrasts a small group, 600, with an entire army, magnifying their bravery. All the world wondered has hyperbole, as it suggests the whole world was watching in awe or shock at their suicidal courage. Plunged in the battery smoke has diction in the word plunged, and it suggests they are diving into the unknown. The smoke represents the chaos and fog of war. Right through the line they broke has a dynamic verb, broke, and it shows their success and military prowess. They actually broke the enemy's formation. Cossack and Russian has proper nouns, and these are names of the specific enemies, grounding the poem in the reality of the Crimean War. Reeled from the sabre stroke has onomatopoeic verb, reeled, and it suggests the physical impact of the British charge. Shattered and sundered has sibilants and plosives, and the sh and d sounds mimic the sound of bone and wood breaking. The enemy is temporarily destroyed. Then they rode back. But not has a conjunction in the word but not, and this marks the turning point of the poem. The tone shifts from victory to tragic loss. Not the 600 has a change in refrain. This is a chilling realization that the number of soldiers has been significantly reduced. Canon to right of them has an repetition and an anaphora, and it repeats the imagery from stanza 3 to show that the danger is just as great on the way back. Canon to left of them has parallelism, as it re-establishes the sense of being trapped. Canon behind them has a shift in preposition, because before it was front and now it's behind, and it shows they have passed the cannons and are now being fired upon from the rear as they flee. Volleyed and thundered has repetition, as the noise of war is relentless and inescapable. Stormed at with shot and shell has sibilance and alliteration, and it reinforces the sensory experience of being under fire. While horse and hero fell has alliteration in horse and hero, and it equates the men with their horses, showing they are all victims of the blunder. The word hero elevates their status. They that had fought so well has past tense, as it moves the action into the past, emphasizing that the battle is over and the loss is permanent. Came through the jaws of death has a repetition of personification, and it shows the few survivors escaping the monster of war. Back from the mouth of hell has repetition of religious imagery, and it emphasizes the horror they have survived. All that was left of them has a determiner, here all, and it creates a sense of fragmentation. They are no longer a 600, but a broken remnant. Left of 600 has numerical imagery. This is the final mention of the number in a tragic context. When can their glory fade has a rhetorical question, and here Tennyson challenges the reader to ensure their memory never dies. He shifts the focus from the defeat to the glory. Oh, the wild charge they made has an exclamative and adjective wild here, and wild suggests something beyond reason or logic, pure, raw bravery. All the world wondered has repetition, and now wondered feels more like admired. Honour the charge they made has an imperative verb in the word honour, and here Tennyson, as poet laureate, is giving the public a direct order. Do not focus on the mistake, focus on the men. Honour the Light Brigade has repetition and parallelism as it reinforces the command to respect the military unit. Noble 600 has a final adjective in the word noble. Here the poem ends with a final positive judgment. Their nobility comes from their obedience and sacrifice. Let's do a section by section analysis then. So, stanza 1 to 2 looks at the charge. What happens is the soldiers receive the order to charge into the valley of death. Tennyson admits someone had blundered, but emphasizes the soldiers' obedience. The effect of this is that it establishes the soldiers as a single, disciplined unit. The dactylic demeter, which is a gallop, makes the movement feel unstoppable and inevitable. Here, the main techniques are the biblical allusion, the rhythm, and the diction. Stanza 3 is the trap. What happens is the soldiers are surrounded by cannons on all sides. They ride bravely into the jaws of death. The effect of this is that it creates a sense of claustrophobia and sensory overload. The reader feels the sheer scale of the danger facing the men. The key techniques are anaphora, onomatopoeia, and personification. Stanzas 4 to 5 are the fight and the retreat. What happens is the cavalry reaches the cannons, fights the enemy, and then retreats, with many men and horses falling along the way. The effect of this is that it shifts from the glory of the charge to the tragedy of the loss. The change in refrain, not the 600, highlights the human cost. The techniques here are sibilants, verbs, and modified refrain. Stanza 6 is the memorial. What happens is Tennyson asks a rhetorical question about their glory and commands the reader to honour the men. The effect of this is that the poem moves from being a description of a battle to a national monument. It cements the soldiers' status as noble heroes, regardless of the military outcome. The main techniques are a rhetorical question, imperative verbs, and an emotive adjective. Let's look at the overall interpretation. So, Alfred, Lord Tennyson's A Child of the Light Brigade explores the intersection of blind obedience, military heroism, and the tragic consequences of failed leadership. Through the use of a driving dactylic rhythm that mimics the relentless gallop of horses, the poem depicts the soldiers not as individuals but as a collective force of nature defined by their discipline. Unlike the Duke's selfish power, the power here is institutional. The soldiers are noble precisely because they surrender their agency to the commands of their superiors, even when someone had blundered. The poem suggests that true glory is found in the sacrifice of the individual for the sake of duty, transforming a military disaster into a legendary act of patriotism. By the end, Tennyson shifts from the chaotic imagery of the mouth of hell to the imperative commands to honour the charge serves as a national memorial. It frames the soldier's death not as a waste of life, but as an immortal glory, leaving the reader with a sense of awe at the soldier's bravery, while subtly masking the political incompetence that sent them to their deaths. And comparison checklist for this essay. So if you want to use this poem in your essay, you have to make sure you include the following. The power of the state. So unlike the private domestic tyranny of the Duke, this poem explores the public power of the military and the state over the lives of the working class. It also looks at the galloping rhythm. So the use of dactylic demeter creates a sense of unstoppable momentum, reflecting how the soldiers are swept up in a machine of war they cannot stop. We also look at heroic objectification. So while the Duke objectifies his wife as a piece of art, Tennyson objectifies the soldiers as a 600, a singular heroic unit whose individual identities are less important than their collective glory. We also look at the masking of reality. So just as the Duke uses polite speech to hide a murder, Tennyson uses glorious poetic language and rhetorical questions to detract from the fact the blunder of the British commanders. So, look at which poems you can compare with Charge of the Light Brigade. The first one is exposure in terms of war and suffering. So, similarities are the lack of agency. Both poems show soldiers who have no control over their fate. In exposure, they are trapped by the weather. In Charge, they are trapped by a blunder. We also look at the use of repetition. So, both poets use repetitive refrains, but nothing happens versus Roll the 600 to emphasize the relentless, inescapable nature of war. The differences are the presentation of death. So Tennyson presents death as glory and a wild charge. Owen in Exposure presents death as a slow, undignified freezing where all their eyes are ice. Another difference is the purpose of the poem. So Tennyson wrote to memorialise and honour the soldiers as poet laureate duty, whereas Owen wrote to expose the pity of war and the reality of the soldiers' suffering to the public. Another poem we can compare with is Bayonet Charge in terms of the reality of the attack. So similarities are the sense of the momentum. Both poems start in media res, which means in the middle of action. Tennyson uses the galloping rhythm, whilst Hughes uses enjambment and caesura to show soldiers suddenly waking up and running. Another similarity is the powerlessness of the soldier. So both poems suggest the soldiers are small parts of a much larger machine. In Charge, they are the 600 following orders. In Bayonet Charge, the soldier is like clockwork, a small cog in a massive political engine. They also look at violent imagery, so both poets use sensory language to convey the horror of the charge, such as the shattered and sundered enemies in Tennyson and the threshing circle of the dying hare in Hughes. Another difference is patriotism versus survival. So Tennyson emphasizes that glory and honor are the most important things. Hughes, however, mocks this. His soldier realizes that king, honor, human dignity, etc., drop like luxuries, replaced only by the raw instinct to survive. Another difference is collective versus individual. So Tennyson focuses on the 600 as a single brave unit. Hughes focuses on the internal thoughts of one man, showing his fear, confusion, and his blue crackling air. Another difference is the outcome. So Tennyson's poem ends with a call to honor the soldiers, turning the event into a legend. Hughes ends with the soldier becoming a weapon, losing his humanity entirely in the terror of the moment. Key quotes to revise for Charge of the Light Brigade. So here are the key quotations. We have half a league, half a league, half a league onward, has rhythm and triple repetition as a dactylic dimeter, mimics the sounds of horses' galloping hooves. It establishes a sense of inevitable, relentless momentum towards destruction. Also, Into the Valley of Death, rode the 600, has a biblical allusion and refrain, as references to Psalm 23 to give the battle an epic spiritual scale. The 600 are presented as a collective heroic unit rather than individuals. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die, has again rhyming triplets and anaphora, emphasizing the soldier's total lack of agency and their blind obedience. It highlights the Victorian ideal of duty over self-preservation. Cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them, cannon in front of them has parallelism and spatial imagery, creates a claustrophobic sense of being trapped. The repetition reflects the overwhelming power of industrial weaponry surrounding the vulnerable men. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, has a rhetorical question and an exclamative, shifts the poem's focus from a military disaster to a national legend, and Tennyson uses this to fix their reputation as immortal heroes in the public's mind.